This build, I should say this video, we're talking about stamina DK. Last time I got to compare Magica DK. We talked a little bit about medium armor. Now we're going to be discussing stamina DK, which is basically the king of the dot builds. Unfortunately, it should have been Magica DK, but stamina DK is king. Primarily because of many of the changes that took place with Venomous Claw. Venomous Claw super strong, especially because they changed the duration. Originally, it was 10 seconds, then it went to 12 seconds, and then they moved it up to 14 seconds. And the reason that impacted stamina DK so much was because the secondary portion of the ability where it says the poison seeps into the target and deals increased damage the longer it lasts, dealing 20% every 2 seconds. The ability ticks every 2 seconds. And so as a result, they've increased the overall damage that the last 2 ticks do because the ability lasts longer. So the longer it sits, the more damage it does. So that last tick deals for an additional 140% more damage, and that's if it actually doesn't compound. That I'm not really aware of. Between that, of course, enemies hit by the hit, of course, get poisoned, which then procs the passive where they gain a little bit more stamina return. Stam DK has absolutely no issues with stamina recovery. It's a really good ability. Deals a lot of damage. Of course, Noxious Breath. Noxious Breath has major fracture attached to it. It deals a decent dot, and of course, lets that dot and that debuff sit on the opponent for longer periods of time. And since stamina builds typically run more weapon damage than most magic builds, as you can see, this is I'm not even pushing for any sort of weapon damage. This build probably tops out around 7,400 weapon damage, which is quite higher than my Magic DK, which sits maybe like around 5k topped out maxed. So pushing 7k, 8k, even close to 10k on a Stam DK is no problem, while still being able to maintain resources because you can just heavy attack, or if you're running dual wield, you can just sit there, charge up a dual wield, and regain your stamina back, while that, of course, you cannot do on the counterplay of the Magica DK. You really can't utilize a sword and shield. Most people who typically run a Destro staff, most of the players that I've come across get their handheld via proc sets, like whatever that set that I talked about last time, where it deals damage every 2 seconds whenever you put what's it called, LE drain on somebody. Forget the name of the two piece, but that is ridiculously OP. Between that and most of these people run some other form of a proc set, and all of their damage is given to them by ZeniMax Online Studios. And of course, that is not necessary on a Stam DK because Stam DK is the king of the dot builds. Between that, originally, Flames of Oblivion was not an ability used by stamina DKs. It was restricted because it was a magic ability, and of course it dealt fire damage, and that was based off of your spell damage and of your max magicka, etc. It's typically a magic build, magicka based ability, and then they gave it to Stam DK. Why? I don't know. Stam DK already OP to begin with. On top of that, of course, one of the most overperforming things on Stam DK is, of course, the reduction. World in Ruins. There's nothing on Magic DK that comes even close. The best at Magic DK in terms of cost reduction is the first part, which is not even. You just gain a little bit more damage. There's no cost reduction built into Magica DK, but for some odd reason, Stamina DK gets 25% for anything that deals poison, which would be, of course, their main 2 dots, which is Noxious of Breath and Venomous Claw. And as you can see, these are really, really cheap. On Magica DK, this ability, I think, even in light armor, even on my Breton, is like 2,400, and very similarly with Noxious Breath, with Engulfing, much more expensive on a Magica DK that does not have any cost reduction at all built into their kit. And of course, moving on, typically you're not going to see a lot of Stam DKs run anything outside of Volatile Armor for their armor buff, which gives them more healing because of the passive. And of course, healing in stamina is based off of your weapon damage. And since you can typically run more weapon damage than you can spell damage, stamina-based builds, especially on Stam DK, overperform all day, every day. On top of that, you might come across a rare Stamina DK that utilizes wings. It is very costly, but you do gain, of course, the added benefit of the damage reduction from projectiles. But typically on a stam DK, you're typically not going to need it because most of your defense is either going to come from roll dodge, or you might be wearing heavy armor, and then you'll be relegated to blocking. And of course, DK already has a passive that reduces the chance to block, so not really all that important to utilize it, because you really don't need it for the mobility, etc. On a rare occasion you might, but for the most part you don't see many stam DKs running it. Now, of course, one thing that you will see run on just about every stam DK, and you will never see run typically on a good Magicka DK, is Fragmented Shield. Fragmented Shield is way too expensive for a Magicka DK to run. As you can see, the cost is way too much for what it does, which is next to nothing for a Magicka DK, while being amazing on a stam DK. Returns some stamina back. Of course, it gives you access to your passive, which gives you minor brutality, which gives you an additional 10%, which got buffed. It was originally 5. They brought it up to 10, as if stamina DK needed more weapon damage. But hey. And then on top of that, you can use it every 6 seconds to gain access to the passive, which Magicka DK has no access to. The only way Magicka DK can gain access to that passive is with Fossilize, and that is on a minimum, of a 7-second rotation. If your opponent uses, for example, like a CC immunity pot, then Magicka DK basically loses access to the passive for the next 21 seconds. With that said, it also like I said, it gives you access to a little bit more stamina. The shield is not all that important, and of course, you might see some DKs either use Fossilize. Fossilize is very strong, but if you don't have a lot of magic up between, Fossilize this, and then of course your armor buff, some might not use it, especially if you're using a 2H. You might work with either Wrecking Blow or Dizzying Swing for the off balance, or you could use, like, for example, the stun for the bow. So you got so many options to choose from. While Magicka DK, their only option is, of course, Fossilize. Now, with that said, going into Earth and Heart, they also, one of the best ultimates for stam DK, of course, is Corrosive Armor, which allows you to basically bypass all of your opponent's senses. While active, this ability and direct damage dealt ignores enemy physical resistance. So you basically bypass all of your opponent's physical resistances. The other morph just gives you a damage shield, and that's it. As you can see, that's pretty lackluster for a stamina DK. Couldn't even imagine asking for Magicka resistance bypass on a Magicka DK. It's just like, hell's no. Developers wouldn't even think of doing that, and I think it's because most of them have PTSD from fighting Magicka DKs back in the day, and they do everything they basically do everything in their power to kind of keep Magicka DK neutered, because it was very strong back in the day, was really strong back in like 1.5, 1.6, and of course you don't see too many of them running outside of the ones that typically run a lot of proc sets. But it is what it is. A really good ability that you never see utilized on a Magicka DK. You never see the other morph utilized on a Magicka DK because the ability is just shit. But hey, that's just Magicka DK in general, is Stone Fist. Stone Fist, a lot of people don't use it, but it is a really good, amazing ability. Deals really good damage. Is a good spammable. On top of that, it'll proc your passive, and of course, if you utilize it when you're surrounded by individuals, it'll deal AoE damage, and then of course you'll be able to use it as it's a ranged ability. Deals fairly good damage, and as you can see, all enemies within 6 meters, it says they take debris. It says debris ripped from the ground around you. Activating the ability allows you to launch part of the debris at the enemy, dealing 7,000 damage up to 3 times, and then the final cast stuns them. So you don't necessarily have to run a CC, especially this is really good if you're running, for example, dual wield. And we'll take a look at a build that I unfortunately haven't had the opportunity to play. I may one day put it together, but I did showcase this build a very long time ago, just showing how strong a build like this would be. And now again, I have to fix this because I didn't put the CP in, the new CP I should say, but we'll take a look. This build sports just roughly shy of 10k. As you can see, fully buffed, you're sitting at 9,600 weapon damage, and if this of course is maximized if you're playing, for example, with a small group. i.e. like a Nightblade and somebody running the minor buffs, this build would be amazing. As you can see, lots of HP, and this is without, I didn't update it with the CP in, but as you can see, sporting roughly 9600, not too bad on the weapon critical. You can see the physical resistance a little low, but it is a medium build, so not to worry about. Don't need too much in terms of regen. Of course, that would be adjusted if I actually sat and put the passives in from here. But as you can see, we're just going to take a look at the ability here, and then again, this is missing some of the passive. As you can see, a 1400 spammable that's instant cast is actually not too bad. Looking at it previously, you can take a look at it. I rest my case for a lot of people who are like, Stam, this ability isn't all that great. 17.5k on an instant spammable. I would love to see that on my Magicka DK, but of course that will never happen because Magicka DK is relegated to being one of the gimpest classes. Unfortunately, one of the most fun classes to play, but unfortunately lacks in the development part. We really need, like I said, really need a good developer to come in and kind of fix all this stuff. But at this point, it's probably not going to happen. I think that's about it. Talking Stam DK. Stam DK super strong. Can basically run 2H. You can run 2H bow. You can run dual wield and bow. You can run sword and shield and 2Hs. So many different ways that you can play Stamina DK. It's a really fun class to play. Makes a really good tank. Probably the best tank for PvP. And of course, don't get me started on Dragon Leap. Dragon Leap OP. I can't tell you how many times I get hit by a Stamina DK, and every time I look at my death creep recap, I already know what it was that killed me. I don't know exactly what it is. When I compare Stam DK Ferocious, like Take Flight, and I compare it to, for example, a Ferocious Leap, I can never get a 10k on my leap unless I'm hitting somebody with no armor. But Stam DK, I can hit 10k all day. 10k is typically on the low end. On a really on a build with 7k, you're probably gonna hit 12k. And I'm talking no CP. I'm talking no CP. No CP. Stam DK's leap deals ridiculous amounts of damage. I'm not exactly sure what it is. I think it probably has to do with the major fracture that's behind it, because major fracture is better than the engulfing debuff. But hey, it is what it is. Gonna leave it here. Feel free, of course, to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll check you out next time. Thanks for watching.